Just say no, Jordan, and keep counting. I don't care if this is live or not. You don't have to ask us if we're ready to go, bring up a totally unrelated topic, and then ask us again if we're ready to go. We're ready to go the first time. We're ready to go, Jordan. Has to go over his pop music and what it is that he's into these days. Hey, guys, NFL Live Before Lock is started. Jordan is letting us know about some musicians. Who knows? Whatever music they listen to out in Los Angeles. But Matt and I are here to break down tonight's NFL game. It's Monday Night Football. We've got the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the New York Giants. And it's not the best game on paper, but as Matt and I were talking about before, it doesn't matter. When we got a showdown slate to go over, sponsored here by Underdog. So if you guys want to check out Underdog, there's a little bit in it for you, which is that if you sign up down below, we've got a link that's going to take you to the landing page over at Stokastic. And if you guys do choose to sign up for Underdog or any of these other sites through that link, you get 1 free month of core access to any sport of your choosing. NFL, NBA, probably not in your best interest to pick baseball at this point, but whatever it is that you want to sign up for, you could sign up for a core of any month of your choosing and for as many of these you want. You want to sign up for 9 of these books here? Sign up for 9. Get 9 free months of different packages of your choosing. And Underdog sponsoring today's show. They've also got a great deposit bonus offer. Get up to $250 in bonus dollars over there at Underdog when you sign up with one of our links. But other than that, guys, just do us a favor. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I haven't done a show with Matt Gajewski in a minute. I think the last one we did together might have been a college football show where I had no clue what the hell I was doing. But Matt, what's up, man?
Yeah, man. Maybe it was. Or maybe we did something for the NBA draft. I think we were on playback or something.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
talking
that's true.
some NBA draft props. As either way, that was way back when in the summer.
Yeah,
that might have been 2 years ago. I might be misremembering.
Nobody knows. We know we went over before the show. Jordan sure as shit doesn't know. He doesn't know. Well, also, the other thing I didn't think about too is I said that Jordan has bad memory. That would require him having knowledge that was worth retaining, though. And his knowledge is just Zins, his volcano, his vape. He doesn't know too many. Oh, Call of Duty. He knows Call of Duty. I'm sure that Jordan's got a Call of Duty 6 Black Ops on a pre-order over there. But we love Jordan, and also like the video. Subscribe to the channel for Jordan as well. And if you guys are a Stokastic sub, and this applies to any of our packages, anything you sign up for, you get access to our Discord channel. If you have any questions for myself or Matt over the course of the show, I'm keeping an eye on the Discord at me, and I will certainly see those questions and answer any ones that you have. Matt, before we get into talking about the individual players we want to be rostering from this game, who are you picking to win? Anything that you have on mind in terms of a side or any bets for the game or anything like that, or just an outright pick as well?
I didn't take anything. If you forced me to, it would be the Steelers, with the Giants just kind of in turmoil at the quarterback position. I think they'll find success in this game in certain areas, but with the offensive line injuries they have, losing their best player on that unit, they're probably going to have their hands full with TJ Watt and a pretty good Steelers front. Just a lot for them that needs to go right in order to win this game. So I think the Steelers would be the side. I would take them to cover the 6 too if I had to pick. What about you? Where are you?
I could tell you that I lean to a little bit of bias here because my dad is a diehard Giants fan. And so my parents retired, they live in Florida, but they stay with me when it is the warm weather months down in Florida. So the start of the season, I've been forced to watch these Giants games with my dad, and they are brutal to watch. And that that lends me to pick against the Giants whenever they are playing. But also, it's just a terrible team. Daniel Jones is not going to have a future with the team. The offensive line is horrific, and it was not great coming in, and it's been bad the last couple of years, but also the injury to Andrew Thomas and the lack of depth they have on the offensive line has been a major issue. You've seen Daniel Jones under siege constantly, and that's one of the reasons why also, I don't know if you've rerun The Sims since our last update, Matt, but big talking point is going to have to be, what are we going to do with the Steelers? Because you don't see too many slates where a defense is really chalky, but I think there's a possibility for that with the Steelers today, considering the state of the Giants offense and the offensive line in particular, Matt.
Yeah, I definitely see paths for both defenses. I'm just kind of getting a grips on the current run. I have more Steelers than I did this morning. So just trying to decide what to do with that. I have a fair amount of Steelers in captain now too, which comes as a little bit of surprise, but I guess just X and O's, you laid it out pretty well. That pass rush should be able to get home on Daniel Jones. They're now allowing one of the highest pressure rates in the NFL. Jones has some escapability, but it doesn't matter when it's happening almost every single time you drop back. But I could see that being an avenue the Giants also use to exploit. The Steelers have some injuries on their offensive line. Nothing quite to the caliber of Andrew Thomas, but the Giants actually have a pretty formidable pass rush themselves. And they've actually gotten pretty good play out of some of the guys that have been disappointments for them really all year. And I guess going back a couple of years, Ojulari has been pretty good for them. Dexter Lawrence, of course, is an absolute monster. And then Brian Burns coming over in free agency. So I actually don't hate them either. Going to see where I come into the Giants defense, but at a cheaper price tag, there's someone I'm interested in too, which is weird to say, having so much interest in the defenses on a showdown slate, but that's how it is.
Yeah, and it's not very often, really at all, when I'm playing NFL DFS that the defense becomes a talking point. Even for a lot of showdown slates, it'll often be like, hey, if you get to the defense today, like whatever, it's fine. Some slates I'll say like, yeah, just don't go ahead and look at the defense. You kind of can't ignore them for this particular slate. Let's start here by talking about the quarterbacks, though, Matt. And, Daniel Jones, we did touch a little bit on the fact that he's likely to be under pressure a lot today. Both these teams, I think you'd have to favor the defenses over the offenses in terms of the talent on each team relative to their offense and defense. But I want to ask you about Russell Wilson, who has taken over, at least for now, the starting quarterback job from Justin Fields, who also happens to be hurt today. He's the third string QB just available for emergency situations. But with Russell Wilson under helm for the Pittsburgh Steelers, couple of questions. Number one, what do you make of him as a DFS option today? And how is him at quarterback different for you in DFS contests than when Justin Fields was at quarterback?
Less interest in him in general because of the mobility Justin Fields provides. But in the context of this slate, he's pretty hard to get away from. We have a lot of good value pieces that open up salary to the top. And then outside of Neighbors, I don't really think and I guess Daniel Jones, there's not anyone you're super excited about. So I end up getting to a lot of Russell Wilson just kind of by default. And I don't think it's anything that he does well individually himself. He's on a run-based offense. They clearly would like to take the ball out of his hands and shove it right into Najee Harris's stomach. But at the same time, it's who else are you playing with all this available salary we have? He still touches the ball every single play. Even with like 220 and a touchdown, he still could be optimal just with a lack of alternatives.
Yeah, and something that is pretty noticeable to me when I run my lineups through the Sims here and just looking at some of the top ones, and it relates to what you had said there about using all of your salary and why Russell Wilson just lands in a bunch of lineups. I don't know about you, Matt, but I have a ton of lineups that leave a bunch of salary on the table. Like when I look at my top projected ROI lineups, there's some of them that use a lot of the salary, but there's other lineups too. Like my top lineup by Sim ROI is leaving $1,400 on the table. Second one, $700 on the table. And then I've got one down here, like my sixth lineup is leaving over $3,000 in salary on the table. Considering that we just talked about how this could be a better spot for defense than we often see in these primetime games, how much salary are you willing to leave on the table in the lineups you build?
Yeah, I'm right in the same range as you. My third one has 2,400 on the table. My fourth one has 2K on the table. You very easily can do this. And I think there's just a couple of players on the slate that are drastically underpriced in full-time roles, which lends itself to leaving salary on the table. It's not even just an ownership thing today. These are highly projected lineups. I went and sorted by projected fantasy points instead of just simulated ROI. A lot of the highest lineups still leave salary on the table because of the price of Tyrone Tracy. He's mainly the driver of this, the lead back being 4,400, Devin Singletary, the 1B, I suppose, being priced exorbitantly on this slate. For DraftKings, they just made an error. FanDuel is a little different, but on DraftKings specifically, they're not even bad lineups. It's not even just a leverage thing. They just straight up project well.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is what you had said right there, which is this has kind of been priced, the running backs on the Giants, as if this was a situation like week 1 or week 2, where Devin Singletary was the starter and Tyrone Tracy, I don't remember what his workload was earlier in the year, but it wasn't super significant. And now that Singletary's back, and I mean, we saw Singletary back last week as well, there's still clearly a role here for Tyrone Tracy, but he's priced like it's more towards the start of the season where he was getting like just a couple of carries and it was Devin Singletary getting the bulk of the workload. So he just kind of stands out as an obvious value for this game, which also to the reasons of us leaving a bunch of salary on the table. Like it's not hard to see a scenario where Tyrone Tracy outscores like Devin Singletary, who's thousands of dollars more expensive. And if you were to make that swap, you're all of a sudden leaving a bunch of salary on the table. But let's start answering some of these super chats that have come in. And shout out to Chris Williams, who gifted out 5 YouTube memberships. So as always, Chris, thank you for supporting the channel. And then also he left us a super chat, which says, getting it out of the way early. He says that he's already atoned for his sins and hit the like button, but he wants everybody else to do the same. Bring yourself some good karma and hit the like button. There should be nobody who's accrued more good karma around here than Chris Williams, who is always supporting us and the channel here. So shout out to Chris. Do appreciate you. And let's see from Discord, no questions from there yet. So we talked a little bit about Russell Wilson, Matt, but now I also want to ask you about Daniel Jones, and then we'll make a decision. Who do we prefer at quarterback? If somebody's building a lineup and they're only playing one, they go to Daniel Jones or Russell Wilson. But first, what do you make of Daniel Jones's fantasy upside tonight? And should we be concerned that he has a clause in his contract, which is basically the Giants have been out after this year? At the end of the season, team option, if they don't like Daniel Jones, which it pretty clearly seems like they don't, and I don't think there's a future for him here, they can just get rid of Daniel Jones and they don't have to worry about his stupid contract ever again. But there's a caveat there. If he gets hurt this year and it's a significant injury, that contract is guaranteed and the Giants are stuck with him on the books. Is there any risk of the Giants falling behind, in your opinion, by a couple of touchdowns and they pull Daniel Jones from the game? And is that going to inform your lineups at all?
If that happens, definitely. We saw that happen just last week. But if it remains remotely competitive, I still think they're kind of testing out what they have, not just with him, but they have a lot of young players on this team that they're trying to evaluate, and some that haven't performed all that well. You know, like a guy like Jalen Hyatt should get work in that kind of instance if they're in a blowout situation where they're losing. A lot of players that haven't lived up to expectations that the Giants are evaluating right now. So I don't know if like putting Drew Lock in there really gives your team the best chance to even see what you have with the ancillary players. But anyway, if this remains competitive or even plays to the spread of 6 points, I think that's beneficial to Daniel Jones. And if you force me to just pick one of these guys, it would be him. If it plays to the spread, which the Steelers are favored by 6, the ball's likely coming out of Russell Wilson's hands more in favor of Jalen Warren, Najee Harris. This is a team that wants to run the ball at one of the highest rates in the league, maybe higher than any other team except the Chargers. That should depress Wilson's attempts. That forces Daniel Jones into a game script where he ends up passing more. And I like his skill set just in general more than Russell Wilson's. He's a guy that's not afraid to scramble. And even if that's for 30 yards or something, that floor is something that Wilson doesn't provide. So in just one lineup, I do prefer Jones. And, you know, if they get crushed by 20 points and he gets pulled at the end of the game, like I lost anyway with Daniel, or at least the lineups with Daniel Jones are already dead.
Totally agree. And that's also why I prefer Daniel Jones as a captain option as well, Matt, because to me, there's more upside in Daniel Jones just because of that ability you talked about with him to run the football. And it's part of the reason, too, that we've seen him have injury issues over the course of his career. But if you look at Daniel Jones, he's somebody who there's a pretty big gap between his fantasy ability and his real life ability just because of how willing he is to run the football and what that does for his fantasy point upside. So last week, the game was a blowout. And like you mentioned, he comes out of the game. We end up seeing Locke in the second half. So he only had 5 rushing attempts. The 2 weeks prior against the Bengals, 11 carries for 56 yards for Daniel Jones. The week before, 11 carries for 38 yards. There's a lot of drawn up designed run plays for Daniel Jones, which is just giving him a few extra fantasy points per game that you're not all that likely to get out of Russell Wilson. There's some rushing ability from Wilson. I don't want to make it seem like a 0, but of all the potential quarterbacks we would have had in this game, Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. Wilson pretty clearly has the lowest rushing upside there. So if I'm going to be playing one of the QBs, I'm on the same page with you. It's Daniel Jones. And then also, it's pretty clear to me if I was going to roster one of these quarterbacks in either the captain spot on DraftKings or the MVP spot on FanDuel, it's Daniel Jones over Russell Wilson for myself, Matt. Would it be the same for you?
It is the same. In the Sims, I got a little bit more of Russell Wilson, debating if I want to negatively boost this or possibly boost Jones. I'm going to play around with it and see where we go. Kind of just want to smooth it out between the two.
And then we've got, what is here? Yeah, Matt Martin wants to know, what are the top 3 plays on this NFL game on DK? So I'm assuming it just means overall 3 players we have the most exposure to. So Matt, if there was 3 players to Matt's question, you can't go with that. You need a roster these 3 guys. I'm not saying they're, like locks or anything, but say he was playing 20 lineups, wants to know which 3 players to have the most exposure to. From one Matt to another Matt, which 3 players you say are most important on the slate overall?
first two guys clearly in my lineup would be Tracy and Neighbors. Then there's a gap. I would rank Najee Harris third, but I think it's close between him and the QBs. Maybe you could include Pickens, but I do think Neighbors and Tracy are pretty clearly the two best plays.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially on Neighbors, just because where we have this kind of lack of spend up options that you and I have gone over, and Neighbors just an elite fantasy player who the price point's kind of irrelevant. He is, and he's still modestly priced, especially on DraftKings. What's his flex price?
He's
10,
just flat 10K.
Yeah. Considering how many cheap players there are to go in this game, and that we don't have like the CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson sort of studs, although Neighbors is kind of close to that level at this point. It's so easy to pay up for him. Like I have lineups that have Malik Neighbors that are still leaving thousands of dollars in salary on the table. So it's so easy to fit him in. Like, why would you not go to the guy who pretty clearly is the best overall skill position player in the game and has the most fantasy upside? So I agree with you on Malik Neighbors on the high end. On the low end also, I agree with you. It's Tyrone Tracy. But in between, I'm actually going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, who are showing up like in an uncomfortable amount of lineups for myself, Matt. And this is a spot where even if the Giants offense does okay, I think it's just inevitable that Daniel Jones is going to be sacked. There's going to be turnover opportunities. So I like the Steelers in the mid-range. If I was going like those kind of tiers, pay up, Malik Neighbors, mid-range, Steelers defense, then cheaper, Tyrone Tracy is the guy that I want to be going to there. And let's talk about those running backs now, where Tyrone Tracy, not quite correctly priced on DraftKings, but he is more expensive on FanDuel. So I want to ask you also, for the FanDuel people out there, we know we like Tracy at $4,400 on DraftKings. What do you make of him on FanDuel, where he's a little bit more expensive and is going up against a pretty difficult defense?
Yeah, I think he's okay on FanDuel. He definitely is not quite the same play as DraftKings. FanDuel in general is a lot more efficiently priced. So just have been monitoring that closely. And he's not a preferred play over there. I still think I'd rather do more of a stars and scrubs build, play guys that are, you know, like Neighbors still, and then maybe just go down to a Freiermuth. The kickers and defenses are live over there too. But in general, I'm finding myself more stars and scrubs rather than like the 10K, 11K range where Tracy finds himself.
Yeah. Yep, totally makes sense. And also, one of the benefits of getting some action on DraftKings and FanDuel is like you just get exposure to different players, and it kind of naturally is going to diversify your portfolio and what your exposures look like. Because if Tracy is a big game and you play, and also it's not like Tracy's crazy popular on DraftKings. I think he should be higher owned than what he is. We've got him at just under 30% owned. So just kind of naturally be getting exposure to Tracy on DraftKings and not on FanDuel. But we've got another question here. This one in the couple ones in the Discord channel. We'll talk about Devin Singletary and some of the Steelers running backs as well. But Zach Attack wants to know, which kicker do we prefer on FanDuel? Matt, do you have a strong lean towards Boswell or towards Joseph, or is it just no real difference for you between the two?
Well, they're the same price on FanDuel. So generally, if this is a situation that comes up, I'll just pick the guy with a higher team total. Pretty clearly the Steelers, and that's just basically they have a higher scoring expectation than the Giants. I think they're both talented. You know, it's not, I think one guy's a lot better than the other. It's just Steelers are going to score more points.
Yeah, so for myself, let me see. Let me update the ownership and see what we're looking at for the FanDuel projected.
It's not super different.
Okay. Yeah, then I agree with you. The only thing I was going to lean on is actually we've got Boswell. What is that? Boswell at 8.77 fantasy points. Greg Joseph at 6.6. The ownership project. I'm such an idiot.
The ownership and utility, it's 33 Boswell, 23 Joseph. Captain's negligible for both.
The projection gap is actually big enough between the kickers that it's kind of hard for me to overlook.
I agree.
Yeah, like it's very rare that we see a showdown slate where the kickers are separated by 2 fantasy points. I was going to look at the ownership and accidentally clicked on the projections page, and it just stood out to me how big of a gap there was between the kickers, and I kind of distracted myself a little bit. But yeah, just considering that, unless like one of these kickers was like 50% owned, one was 10% owned, that would be something that would sway my opinion. But I mean, 2 fantasy points, that's a pretty big projection gap between 2 kickers. So I'm going to say Boswell is the answer. I'm going to agree with Matt there for your question there, Zach Attack. And then Matt Martin asked another question. He wants to know, is Tracy the best captain to get to these other big pieces, would you recommend to expose to a different captain than DraftKings? He's asking. Yeah, pretty clearly my favorite overall captain is Malik Neighbors. Is that the same for yourself, Matt?
Yes. As far as Tracy pertains to captain, you just don't need to do it. Like start even just like going to your DraftKings app on your phone or something. Put Tracy in the captain. You almost can't use all your salary. It's nearly impossible to do it. You can play at least 3 studs, if not 4, and then you're still left with a pretty strong mid-range player. So I think the duplication for the Tracy captain lineups might be a little higher than we think. And then it's just they're going to be a little bit worse projected overall because you're foregoing like a Neighbors in the captain, and you don't really need to with the available options we have.
Here's the Jordan. Can you pull up the single lineup sims? Because here's something I think we can make a little bit of a point out of. Here's the other issue I have with Tyrone Tracy in the captain spot, Matt, is I think it's going to gravitate a lot of people towards the same builds, where even if you have Tracy in the captain and the actual ownership projection might not be especially high, what is going to happen is you're just naturally going to gravitate towards a lot of the same players. It's like, Jordan, plug Malik Neighbors in. That's just kind of like common. Yeah, if you're going to have Tyrone Tracy, you're going to have Malik Neighbors. You're probably going to have George Pickens in that lineup too. And yeah, we still got over 7,000 left. So then you're going to probably plug Russell Wilson in. Still got a lot of salary.
Yeah,
so
see, when
Daniel
you start
Jones.
clicking, it's wild.
Yeah. So now you plug in Daniel Jones, and now it's just you're rostering 4,600, whoever fills out that lineup spot there. Here's the issue with Tyrone Tracy at running back. And this is probably, I assume, Matt Martin, probably kind of similar to the lineup you've built, because this is just what you're going to end up getting to here, is a lot of people are going to have lineups that are like 1v1s that have Tyrone Tracy in the captain spot. Either that or like you're rooting for Malik Neighbors to not be one of the 5 or 6 high scoring players on the slate. So I do really like Tyrone Tracy for this game. It's just going to be hard for me for a couple of things. Like Matt said, it's hard to ignore the upside of Malik Neighbors if you're foregoing him in the captain spot. But then also you're just competing with so many similar lineups, even if it seems like it might be contrarian at first look. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why too, just 1.6% sim ROI when we ran that through there. I don't know the exact reason, but I would assume this is probably a lineup that on our back end is projected to be duped a bunch of times, and therefore lowered the expected sim ROI there. But if people do want to roster a cheap captain, because it kind of seems that's what people might be getting at here, is if we don't want to go Tyrone Tracy, Matt, is there a cheap captain you like for the slate, or do we just want to try to use all our salary and get more expensive if possible?
Honestly, it's probably a defense, man. And I don't feel, I mean, this is kind of just a natural instinct. Not feeling great about defensive captain lineups, even though they do win showdowns. Every single year we see defensive scoring environments, low scoring games with turnovers and interceptions for touchdowns, whatever it is. This is one of those potential slates. It is a low total, really shaky offensive lines, really shaky QBs, and amazing pass rushes. This is also because the value other than Tracy is horrific today. Some of the worst value I can remember in recent memory. You basically just have the rotational Steelers receivers or Theo Johnson, and that's about it. So there's not a lot of alternatives if you do want to play other value guys. It's sort of Tracy, the kickers, and the defense.
Yeah, I would say if I'm going to go cheap, number 1 option for me would be the Steelers. Number 2 would be Chris Boswell. This feels like one of these stupid showdown games that could be very, very kicker heavy, which is a lot of them. I'm overweight to both the kickers whenever I run everything through the Sims. Also, as far as like, this is probably in total, if I'm looking at all of my defense and all my kicker exposure, I think it's the most I've had to the defenses plus kickers the entire year, because the defenses show up a lot. The kickers always show up a good amount in our sims. So I think all of them look like good options, with Chris Boswell projecting so much better for us than Greg Joseph. I would say that if you want to go cheap, number 1 option be Steelers defense, number 2, Chris Boswell. But in general, I think the priority should be to spend up at the captain spot. And then over on FanDuel, there's no reason to consider the defense or the kickers. Then I think you just want to go to one of the studs. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, on FanDuel for sure. There's a pretty weak value range over there too. And I mean, they have a different pricing structure. So rarely am I getting to any cheap captains on FanDuel to begin with. But I think better, sir, especially, you don't have to pay extra for them in the captain spot. So I think it's just best they're paying up for the studs on that site.
And let's see what we have for the next question here. This one is from Einstein. He wants to know, do we have any interest in Darius Slayton tonight, Matt? And Darius Slayton had a couple of big games, was drawing a lot of targets after Malik Neighbors got hurt. Now Neighbors is back in the picture, so no surprise. Target share, all the participation starts to drop for Darius Slayton. What are you doing with him today, though? Is he somebody who you might be looking to get to, potentially for low ownership, even though Neighbors is back?
I don't think so, for one of the big reasons you said. You can get Tyrone Tracy for around 30% projected ownership. So some of the players up at the top that we already have a lot of interest in playing, they're coming in with pretty low ownership. So I'm not sure you need to take the risk on a guy like Darius Slayton, whose price still a little too expensive. And that comes from the games where he had 11 targets where Neighbors missed. There were 2 games like that. Outside of that contest, those 2 contests, I should say, he hasn't seen more than 5 targets in any game this year. So yeah, he's kind of running your clear out routes, wind sprinting down the field type stuff. That's all he's doing. He would need to catch a bomb, I think, in this game, which is not likely.
Yeah, if you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Across my top 150 lineups, Darius Slayton showed up in 4 of them. So definitely not somebody who I think is like a significant target. Certainly not one who shows up in our tools or sims here. And then we've got Smitch926 wants to know, for the flex, do you prefer George Pickens or Najee Harris? So just 1v1, he's trying to fit one guy in. Do you have a lean towards Najee Harris or George Pickens? I will say that this is a little bit hard to answer some showdown 1v1 questions without the context of the rest of your lineup being involved. I have more exposure to Najee Harris personally, Matt. So without knowing any other information, I'm more inclined to say Najee Harris. The qualifier here is that, like, if you have Russell Wilson in that lineup there, Smitch, and you don't have any pass catchers from the Steelers, then George Pickens would be the answer. But in general, do you prefer Harris or Pickens?
I prefer Harris for a lot of the reasons you mentioned already, and some of the nuanced stuff too. But just in general, we know what the Steelers want to do. They want to run the ball, and they want to run it right down the Giants' throat. Game environment stuff should favor Najee, nearly touchdown favorites. Giants haven't, although the Giants are pretty good in pass rush, they have not been super imposing in run defense. So I'm not exactly expecting this to be a rigorous matchup for Najee Harris. Even with Warren back, I still think he projects just fine.
And then we've got one other question in here that I want to answer, and then we'll go back to talking about the running backs, Devin Singletary, and Smitch then wanted to know, he followed up. He said he has Neighbors in the captain, Wilson in the flex. So here's what I'm going to say to you, Smitch. If you have Russell Wilson and no other pass catchers at all from the Steelers, then plug Pickens in instead of Harris. But say you have like Freiermuth or one of the other pass catchers, then you're good with Harris. So those are like the what if kind of scenarios that I would add to that. But getting back to talking about some of the running backs here, man, we've already touched on Najee Harris a little bit, and we've talked in passing about Devin Singletary. What do you want to do with Devin Singletary on DraftKings? He's probably going to be splitting a workload with Tyrone Tracy. He's twice the price point of Tracy, though, and it's a tough matchup against the Steelers. So what are you going to be doing as far as rostering Devin Singletary tonight?
I think he's just straight up an awful play based on his workload and his price. And because of that bias I'm walking into this slate with, I'm not going to change anything in the tools. I'm just going to let it ride, get what I get. In my current run, I have 1 out of 150, so not even a full percent, which is kind of exactly where I want to be. And the answer to this is he just doesn't project well because he's been lapped by Tracy in the backfield. The workload looks kind of close last week. Again, really weird game for the Giants. But when it was competitive, Tracy outsnapped Devin Singletary 39-12. And Tracy's actually awesome at some of the weird gritty stuff that running backs need to do. Pass blocking, Tracy's excellent at that for being a rookie. So he's not even limited by some of just, I don't know, the juvenile stuff that other rookie running backs get pulled for.
Here's the biggest issue with Devin Singletary. It's what's the opportunity cost of pressing his name and entering him into a lineup? Because of all of the players that are priced over 8,000, Devin Singletary is the lowest projection by far. We've got Devin Singletary projected for 7.3 fantasy points. Every other player that's $8,000 or more in our projections is projected for at least 13.5 fantasy points. So it's such a big projection gap that you're really sacrificing a lot to click on Devin Singletary's name and put him into a lineup. And that's just the biggest thing that keeps the Sims away from him and keeps me away from if I was hand building a lineup, I wouldn't play Devin Singletary. It's because if I play Devin Singletary, it means I'm playing him instead of Pickens or Daniel Jones or Russell Wilson or Najee Harris or Malik Neighbors. And these are all guys who are projecting for 2x or maybe even more than 2x in the case of Malik Neighbors in terms of fantasy points to Devin Singletary. So that's going to kind of leave him out of the mix for myself personally. But if we talk about the Steelers situation, that's where I think there's more reasons to consider both of the running backs, Matt. I prefer Najee Harris, but I think that relative to his ownership and the price tag, Jaylen Warren is interesting to me at $7,200. So of the 4 running backs in the game, if I'm ranking them and kind of tiering them off, there's Harris and there's Tyrone Tracy in like tier 1. Then you've got Devin Singletary in maybe even tier 4, even if we're only doing 3 running back tiers. He could just be like below the basement. But then tier 2 is Jaylen Warren, who I think warrants being in 20 to 30% of lineups. I don't know that his pass catching upside is going to be as important for this slate because I don't expect the Steelers to be trailing, but we've seen weirder things happen in primetime games. Is Jaylen Warren somebody that you want to be playing in your lineups at $7,200?
He doesn't project super well price adjusted, but he doesn't project poorly either. So I think you said it well. Coming in around 30% makes a lot of sense to me. Since he's been back from injury, I've actually been a little surprised by his snap counts. Last 2 games, 37%. His first game back, then 51%. It's almost a 50-50 timeshare. Najee is going to handle more of the running back opportunities on the ground specifically, which is why I still think, Najee projects a lot better than Jaylen Warren. But I don't actually hate playing these guys together. I have a few lineups that do that near the top of my sim ROI too. Not a ton, but it is in there. And it's going to play more to the game script that they win this game by 7 points, 6 points, or maybe more. So yeah, I have some interest in Warren. Not going to be heavily exposed, but definitely not going to be anywhere near 0.
Yeah, he's not Tyrone Tracy. He's not Najee Harris, but he's not Devin Singletary in the low end either. He's kind of somewhere in between for me as far as an option goes at running back. We just double check to make sure there was no other questions that we missed. And we've got one here from Matt Martin. He wants to know, who is the must play in a heavy contrarian lineup? I like this question. I get where he's getting at. Who's your favorite contrarian play on the slate, Matt? Who's somebody you look at as a really viable way to differentiate a DraftKings lineup? And then we can look at that for FanDuel as well. But starting with DraftKings, who's your favorite overall contrarian option?
I think it's Pat Freiermuth. As a pass catcher for the Steelers, the team that runs a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends in the field. Outside of George Pickens, there isn't really a player on this team that has a significant target share. But Pat Freiermuth has kind of operated as, the de facto wide receiver 2 for a lot of this year. It's only 29 targets. Somehow that's second on the team. Price point's not great on him, but we're talking about contrarian plays for a reason. I'll say Freiermuth for the price-adjusted contrarian play.
He's in my single entry lineup. I usually try to build my single entry lineup to find like one player that I think is going to be even lower owned in single entry than large field GPPs. And Freiermuth's the guy who I landed on for that tonight. So I'm with you. I think Pat Freiermuth on DraftKings is certainly a viable contrarian option. On FanDuel, would it also be Freiermuth for you? Or maybe is there somebody else that stands out to you as a low-owned option? And we could be liberal with the term low-owned, whatever you determine to be a low enough owned option for you here.
I kind of like Warren more on FanDuel. I have a sneaking suspicion that Freiermuth might get steamed a little bit there. When you look at players below 10K, he's kind of like the floor of where I feel pretty comfortable. Once you get below Freiermuth, you're in like full dart throw range. So I think he might be a little more owned over there, but still, I still think he's a great play. But for just the completely, I think, under-owned player, I'll go Warren, I suppose.
I'm going to go Theo Johnson, who, by the way, also was a suggestion here for the question.
He's
Matt
really
suggested
low-owned.
Theo Johnson. And I know that Matt is probably the most knowledgeable person I've ever met when it comes to like college football and NFL draft and stuff. And Matt, do you remember some of the metrics at the combine for Theo Johnson?
Yeah, he's actually one of the best tight end prospects we've had in recent memory for athletic measurables. He came out of Penn State. They're kind of notorious for putting out tight ends like this. They're going to have another guy drafted this year who is an absolute wagon, but he's a rookie. He's taken his lumps for sure. It's a position that generally operates on a slow development curve. So he's out there a lot. not with much target share, but if you're punting all the way down on DraftKings, he's by far my favorite, and that's like the sub 3K guys.
It's something where when there's been like shitty main slates for tight end, which has been a handful of them this year, like I've taken some shots on Theo Johnson, and then it's also been the same case for some of the showdown slates he's been in. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's such an insane athlete in terms of just like his size, his strength, his speed at the tight end position, that I think that has potential to yield a big play at some point where like you could see a screen pass go to Theo Johnson, he breaks a tackle, and all of a sudden he's off to the races and scores a long touchdown. So this is, once again, we're talking about like really contrarian options. You're getting a guy in Theo Johnson who's only 7K on FanDuel and is also sub 10% owned, that at least I could envision him having big play upside. So that's if I'm going really contrarian, the direction that I would potentially want to be going. And so that's the answer that I'm going to give there is Theo Johnson if we're looking to go way off the board for a contrarian option. Let's start talking about some of the other pass catchers now, Matt. And we made our case for Malik Neighbors. I don't think we have to add anything else about him, right? You're playing Malik Neighbors in most of your lineups. If you have the ability to spend up for him, go play him, right? Anything else you would add about Neighbors?
Nope.
Okay. So with that in mind, let's talk about the other receivers on the Giants. Are there any of them that are important to you to be rostering? You know, outside of Theo Johnson's maybe a contrarian option, Wan'Dale Robinson has become more expensive at this point, and also his ownership is a little bit higher than we've seen on some of these other slates. Darius Slayton, we've already hit on him a little bit. Outside of Neighbors, is there anybody really gravitating to as far as Giants pass catchers are concerned?
Wan'Dale has an amazing target share. It's just so uninspiring. He has an ADOT below 5 yards. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's one of the lowest in the NFL. So at his price, he's pricing like Darius Slayton, as if Neighbors has been out for a while. DraftKings is slow to fully adjust these. So, you have your alpha receiver out for a little while, bumps everyone else's targets up. Then the alpha returns. The prices linger for a little bit. So they're both too expensive for their roles. But if you are playing 150, maybe if you're even just playing 20, Wan'Dale would be the secondary preference for me. But honestly, I still think I would put him behind Theo Johnson price adjusted. You mentioned opportunity costs with a guy like Singletary. It's not quite as bad, but I'm still not clicking Wan'Dale Robinson's name over anyone in this price range. And there is a difference, but what I'm trying to say is I would rather just find the salary, get up to Neighbors from Wan'Dale, and then if I have to, find my way down to like a Theo Johnson.
Yeah, it's a little, and not once again that like salary is a massive issue here, but just considering the price point on Wan'Dale Robinson and the ownership projection, I get about half of the fields when I run everything through the Sims, where I get Robinson showing up in my lineups in the teens, whereas he's projected for right around 30% ownership. So he's not unplayable. I just don't like him as much as what the field does relative to what I'm getting using our data here. Other Giants pass catchers, mostly uninspiring. I think the Steelers are a little bit more of an interesting talking point. George Pickens is, to me, a very neutral play, Matt. I don't have a big stand on him. I'm like right in line with the field. I prefer the quarterbacks. I prefer Najee Harris, but Pickens shows up in about a third of lineups, and I'm like totally fine with that. He's somebody who just really wide range of outcomes with George Pickens. Sometimes you watch him, you think, oh, this guy's one of the best athletes we have in the NFL at the wide receiver position. And then there's other days you watch me like, oh, this guy's one of the biggest idiots we have in the NFL at the wide receiver position, which is kind of a tough, it's a tough label to have because there's a lot of dumb wide receivers. But probably my favorite thing he did all year. Did you catch the timing of when Mike Tomlin does the press conference last week and says that,
yeah, that was awesome.
He's like, he said internally they decided what they want to do with the quarterback. They want to keep it tight to the vest because apparently they thought they needed some sort of competitive advantage to beat the Jets, which clearly we know not the case. I mean, the Patriots could beat the Jets. You don't have to pretend to not know who your starting quarterback is to beat the New York Jets. But Mike Tomlin does a press conference and says, we know who the quarterback is, but we aren't going to tell you guys yet. George Pickens goes and talks to the media right afterwards. They ask him about practice money. He was like, it's good to work with Russell Wilson because, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically like, it was good to work with Russell Wilson because he's making his first start. It's like, that's what he opens with. That's like the very first thing he says right after Mike Tomlin. So you get George Pickens. And also you see some of these scenarios where in the past it's hurt his overall target share and maybe some of his snaps at times just because he becomes a frustration point for coaches. But anyway, I just view him as kind of a neutral option here, Matt. Him being about a third owned by the field, I think it's more or less efficient.
I agree. I'll say this. He is the player I'm most worried about completely burying me. and I'm not even underexposed to him, but he goes off for a crazy game. He's the guy that you're kind of kicking yourself like, how did I ignore George Pickens? But everything you said, I'll echo. He's already having a problem with his snaps this year, and it's been a consistent problem. Last game, he was only at 54 of 68 for your alpha receiver. That is somewhat problematic. And then you have more systemic risk with the Steelers offense and their desire to run the ball as many times as they can. So like go and look at Pickens' target share. You're going to find it's awesome. 29.5%, nearly 30%. That's resulted in 53 raw targets. So yeah, he has the amazing target share, but this team is so run heavy that it's not actually leading to as many opportunities as we'd like, which just makes him volatile. Extremely talented. He'll have amazing games, but he's going to have games that are complete duds too.
Yeah. And by the way, I should mention that he's 33% owned in the flex spot, but then also really popular in the captain spot. He's the second most rostered captain on the entire slate, only behind Malik Neighbors. And here's a lot of times the way that I'll approach some of these showdown slates, Matt. If there's somebody who has a really, really wide range of outcomes, my inclination is usually to say, I want less of them in the flex spot, more of them in the captain spot. But when you have a player like George Pickens, who's a really wide range of outcomes, and he's popular in the captain spot, it makes me want to go underweight to the field to get leverage and roster other guys instead. And I personally just way prefer, it's only $300 more for Malik Neighbors in that captain spot over on DraftKings. And their ownership is nearly identical in our projection. So I just would much rather load up on Malik Neighbors, where I have no concerns about his workload. I don't have concerns about him like half-assing on plays, taking plays off and getting pulled out of the game, which we've seen from George Pickens at times. So I'm going to be underweight to the field on George Pickens in the captain spot and then just kind of neutral to him in the utility spot. So I agree with you, though. Like if he goes out and has, because we saw him do it against the Jets. He had a massive game. I forget exactly what his stat line was, but he was somebody who was necessary for the showdown slate. He was even necessary for if you guys were playing on the FanDuel main slate that includes the Sunday night football game, because he had a really big game. So there is potential for him to break the slate. I also think that is a slightly better situation for him with Russell Wilson at quarterback as opposed to Justin Fields. But because of what his ownership is in the captain spot, I'd rather just go to Malik Neighbors there. Other pass catchers on the Steelers that are important to you outside of George Pickens you think are worth discussing?
Freiermuth, but we kind of already hit on him. He's the number 2 for me. I have almost no interest in the Van Jeffersons and Calvin Austins of the world. And we talked about this with Theo Johnson. You just don't necessarily need to get down to those players. And then these guys have even more systemic risk. Not only is Pittsburgh an extremely run-heavy team, but they use a bunch of weird formations. They use a fullback at times, and Connor Hayward, he's listed as a tight end, but he plays like that H-back role. They use a ton of 12 personnel. Darnell Washington's on the field all the time. Michael Pruitt played 30 snaps in the last game, and it was a blowout. But still, Michael Pruitt has a role on this team, which I never thought I'd be saying in the year 2024, but it's the case. It's an Arthur Smith offense, and he loves Michael Pruitt. All of that detracts from the wide receiver 2 and 3 from this team, and they're kind of just splitting that role to begin with. So I would say almost zero interest. They're the kind of guys where if I get a percent or 2 of them in a 150 set, I'm not taking them out, but absolutely not a priority. And if I was playing single entry, I wouldn't even consider these guys.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm looking at my exposures relative to the field. A big part of it, too, is the amount of kicker and defense exposure I get. And the fact that salary, not all that pressing for this slate. But I mean, I hardly have any lineups that show up with Van Jefferson or Calvin Austin. And, Van Jefferson's 4K on DK, Calvin Austin's 3K. You certainly don't need to consider these guys on FanDuel where the min salary is a little bit higher. But I would rather play the kickers or the defenses, Matt. And that's what the Sims are giving me as well. Lots of kicker exposure, lots of defense exposure. And that squeezes the guys like Calvin Austin out of the lineups. The same with Van Jefferson. I have Van Jefferson in 4% of lineups. I've got Calvin Austin in 1% of lineups. Should have been 2 out of 150. So not somebody who's really all that appealing to me at all here. Anything else as far as pass catchers that we haven't hit on?
I love Darnell Washington from a real life perspective. I hope there's a day in his career where he plays for an offense that will use him as a pass catcher. But right now, even though he had 36 snaps in the last game, nearly about 50% of the snaps, a little over that, just 9 routes. So you still can't click his name. He's behind the other guys. I've seen a couple people bring him up in the chat. I love Darnell Washington. He's like on the short list of my favorite players in the NFL. You just can't click him for DFS.
What led to Darnell Washington? He did I believe it was a career high, 4 catches last week. What has led to you having Darnell Washington? He's a very random, I think you could agree, very random player to be your favorite player in the NFL.
Yeah, it's not him or like, I don't know. I've always been a huge Joe Mixon fan, which a lot of people are probably going to say mean things about that. It goes back to way when he was like a young player in college before he did any of the bad stuff. But anyway, with Darnell, it goes back to college too. This guy is just an absolute alien of a human being. He's 6'7", listed at 270 pounds. I'm not sure that's accurate anymore. And he ran a 40-yard dash in 4.64. I mean, that is a couple like hundredths of a second slower than Theo Johnson at 20 more pounds. He basically has the skill set to operate as a 6th offensive lineman, but then he runs a 4.64 40-yard dash. Imagine if Arthur Smith wasn't the offensive coordinator. You can literally run whatever you want with him on the field. You can run like plays for a 6th offensive lineman, or you can play him against a linebacker or a safety, and he's much faster than your linebacker and just dwarfs your safeties and corners. He is like an offensive coordinator's dream. And I can't wait till someone figures it out, because the early returns on him when he's on the field are absolutely awesome too. If you just look at like PFF grading, last week, he was the 2nd highest offensive graded player for this team. He's an amazing blocker, an excellent receiver. Like, what can't this guy do? Just give him more opportunities and let him shine.
If your favorite player is Darnell Washington, I have to know this. Who's your least favorite player in the NFL? Because I have no clue who this could possibly be.
Oh, AJ Dillon, easy.
Okay. Did he burn you in best ball at some point?
No, I just watched. I live in Wisconsin, see a million Green Bay games. He's horrible.
Okay. So you've seen his fat ass run for a lot of 1-yard runs into offensive linemen and fall down?
Yeah, you need 3 yards. He's getting you 1 no matter what. Who's your favorite player?
Favorite player probably right now is Malik Neighbors, just because of the amount of Giants games I've watched with my dad this year, and him being the only watchable player on the team. It's very similar to when the Giants had Odell Beckham to me, where like the team was just absolutely terrible, just like family thing. We watch games together. And it's like, hey, here's this one guy who makes highlight plays that makes the games like watchable for like 18 seconds at a time.
Who's your least favorite player?
Ooh. Whoever 29 on the Bears is after yesterday.
Is that Tyreek Stevenson, the corner?
I think so. Yeah, I'm sure you guys all saw how the Commanders Bears game ended. But did you see the alternate video angle where the play starts and he's not involved in the play at all? He's basically shit talking a fan in the crowd. And then for what he decides to rejoin the play just to sprint across the field and bat the ball up in the air so that Noah Brown can catch it for a touchdown. He's my least favorite player right now.
He was supposed to be the guy that boxed out Noah Brown, if I'm not mistaken, too.
Yeah, I saw somebody breaking that down. I forget who it was, but one of the
same. I don't know if it's accurate or not, but someone did say that. But yeah, he played on some of the Georgia teams with Darnell Washington, who was good at Georgia.
Let's talk about some of the, and also, if you guys haven't done it yet, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, I don't know if I should tell you guys this, but whatever. I'm going to tell you anyway. We had a sub, this part I can tell you. We had a sub win $1 million over the weekend, which is super cool. Always awesome when we see somebody win $1 million as somebody who's subscribed to the site. So we are currently planning it, and this is going to launch tomorrow. There's going to be a sale for our NFL Sims tool. So just want to let you guys know that if you're paying for a package right now, just wait like 8 hours or something like that. And we're going to have a sale going to tomorrow. I don't want to get people mad at me because they said they signed up right before the show started and I didn't tell them. So because we had somebody win a Millie Maker, which Jordan threw up on the screen right there, I believe his name is a Bunt Cake on Twitter, and then a Bunt Cake bunch of numbers. So because we saw our friend Rick win a bunch of money over on DraftKings, we are going to be doing a sale in his honor after winning a Millie Maker yesterday. So I'll be on the lookout for that tomorrow, guys. It's something that Lofty and Ben will be talking about on the First Look show. So if you guys are looking to sign up for NFL tools, there's going to be a sale that starts tomorrow. And once again, shout out to Bun Cake. $1 million, that's no joke. That's good stuff right there. Multiplier options, Matt. pretty clearly the number one overall option in the captain spot on DraftKings to me is going to be Malik Neighbors. You've been on board with that as well. Who's your second favorite, though? If somebody's playing 20 lineups and doesn't want to play Malik Neighbors in all of them, who else would you tell them is a priority to get some exposure to in the captain spot?
Definitely the quarterbacks, but I think if you made me pick a second one, it would be Najee Harris.
Let me see.
And that's largely just what does Pittsburgh want to do? Who's their lead back? He benefits from both.
Yeah, it's Najee Harris for me as well. Looking at my exposure, I only have 2 players that I landed on with more than 20% exposure to in the captain spot. And there's tiers to it. It's Malik Neighbors, then it's Najee Harris. Then there's a bunch of guys who I just have like some exposure to in lineups, like some Steelers, some Chris Boswell, some Daniel Jones, some Russell Wilson. But it's pretty clear to me, Malik Neighbors 1, Najee Harris 2. What about on the FanDuel side of things, where I assume ownership is going to be concentrated on really just a few guys, Malik Neighbors, Najee Harris. There'll be some Daniel Jones and Russell Wilson. Jordan's pulling that ownership up on the screen right there. Is there anything that you would do to make lineups different in the multiplier spot on FanDuel, or is it just Malik Neighbors is the guy or potentially one of the QBs?
It's Neighbors 1. I still think for me it's Najee 2, but it's closer between him and Daniel Jones.
Yeah, looking through some of the ownership on FanDuel, which it's a little bit more spread out in the multiplier spot, which to an extent makes sense just because there's no PPR bonus. But I can't believe, Matt, that Malik Neighbors is only 12% owned in the captain spot on FanDuel. You got Russell Wilson 24% owned too. Like, I don't have an issue. If somebody sent me a lineup and they played Russell Wilson on FanDuel in the MVP spot, I wouldn't tell them it's a bad option or anything like that. But at 24% ownership, I would just rather play Daniel Jones, Najee Harris, or Malik Neighbors, who are all about half as owned as Russell Wilson. So I think the easiest way to differentiate a FanDuel lineup is just being underweight to Russell Wilson in the MVP spot. Then, of course, leaving salary on the table, which is just always going to be something that comes across over for the FanDuel side of things. If anybody has any last second questions for us, hit me up in Discord. I'm on the lookout for those questions for sure. And I do see we had one that came in here from Champ Here for Life. And Champ Here for Life says, how to make 100% Pittsburgh for New York Giants lineups on the Sims. Okay. So we could actually, Jordan, do you have the Sims up right now? So a couple things that I would say to you, Champion for Life. First off, I don't recommend only playing 4-2 Steelers Giants lineups. There's just so many different lineup combinations that could be good. I don't think that like you have to play 4 Steelers 2 Giants. So my first suggestion would be don't exclusively play that. But if you wanted to, if you were convinced that that's what you had to do, you could do it in the stacks right here. Click on the 3 bullet points next to the stack. Yeah, filter. And then if you were to just type in Pittsburgh space 4, PIT, by the way, he might get confused and spell Pittsburgh out full, so I'll specify. Yeah, PIT 4. And then you'll see this will only give you Pittsburgh 4 lineups as a filter. So that's the easiest way to go about and do it. And then if you went and you unfavorited your lineups and just favorited whatever number it is that you want to play here, Champ for Life, it would only give you the Pittsburgh 4 Giants too. But it's not something I recommend you do. Do you have a particular build that you like more than any other kind of build for tonight, Matt?
I mean, the ones that make me feel best are 3s, like 3 3s, 4 2s. But having used the Sims tool long enough, I know not to let my biases get in the way at this point and just play what it gives me in terms of structure wise. Let's see what I have the most of tonight. Right now, it's looking like a lot of 4 2s, a fair amount of 5 1s actually. And it's not really discriminating one side versus the other, but a lot of 4 2s and 5 1s.
Yeah, let me see. What do I have as the actual most frequent in my lineups? It's funny. I don't know about you. It's not something I really pay attention to that much. I just kind of run stuff through. I look at my player exposures, but I don't usually look too close at the breakdowns of the lineups. Other than it's usually something that comes up here and there on the show where people will ask us, you know, how do you like what's the best lineup combination? And I'll usually just look at my exposure and see like what I have the most of. It looks like 3-3 is my most used lineup combo today.
I have a fair amount of that too. It's pretty balanced across the board.
Let me see. 5-1s. I don't have very many 5-1s, but if you did want to make an onslaught stack, I think the Steelers make more sense. And it would probably be Steelers with the defense in it. If you were going to, here's the final question I'll ask you, and then we'll be out for the night because the slate locks in 90 seconds. If you were making onslaught stacks, Matt, of both teams, who'd be the one player you would include from the Giants and the one player you'd include from the Steelers, assuming you have 5 players from the other team on the other side?
Neighbors or Tracy. It's with Tracy, he just frees up a lot. On the Steelers, it's harder with the Steelers, man. Probably Russell Wilson.
I think I'd go Boswell.
That's a good one. I agree with you, actually. I'm changing my pick. Boswell for salary, and he's kind of insulated, I think.
Yeah, I'd go with Chris Boswell. And then you get a really fun sweat where every single possession the Steelers have, you're just rooting for a field goal. And that's how you watch the game. That is some
elite sweat equity.
All right, guys, if you haven't done yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Shout out to Bun Cake for winning a milli yesterday. We're going to have that sale that starts tomorrow, guys, so be on the lookout for that. Other than that, hope you guys have a great time watching the game today. Maybe watch some World Series, maybe get some NBA action in there as well. I'll see you guys back here tomorrow. I'll be back covering NBA, and then, of course, you guys know you can catch Matt really breaking down any kind of football stuff. He's got college football. He's going to be doing Thursday night football. He'll be doing the strategy show in the morning with Waffy as well. But guys, have a great night. See you back here tomorrow. Peace out.